This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice. It is not intended to cause or induce breach of an existing agency agreement.
Hello? 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 This is the Vancouver
Commercial
Real Estate Podcast.
And welcome back to the Vancouver Commercial Real Estate Podcast. I'm Cory Wright.
I'm Adam Scalina. I'm your sometimes host. Joining you this week, Cory. We've got a real rotation going.
This is great.
Last week, you were with Melissa.
Week
before you were with Matt.
It's great.
This week, you're with me. The one thing is you never get bored. We're changing it up on you.
No, it's okay. I appreciate it. Keeps me on my toes.
Yeah. And here's the thing. I am drinking a Nespresso.
Oh, here we go.
I have to bring this up.
Yep.
But first, let's not bury the lead. Who's on the show today?
We have Thomas Wieckowski, who's joining us. He was on when we first started the whole program.
Right.
I don't know,
80 few years ago.
Yeah. So he's a commercial appraiser with Campbell and Pound Commercial. We had Ryan Wong last week on from Ryan, who's also a commercial appraiser. The reason why we wanted to bring these guys on, they're on the front lines of property values. They know what's moving up. They know what's moving down. They know where people are going. They know where people are retreating from. So we wanted to have them on and say, hey, unwind the past 2 years for us. And where are we going forward? The appraisals you did last week, are they down? Are they up? So we're getting sort of stats through these guys. Otherwise, you wouldn't get access to.
I would imagine being a commercial appraiser is a pretty tough gig.
It is. One thing, and again, we'll talk to Thomas about this, is when they go through the appraisal process. I mean, you get your condo appraised, you get a 2 or 3 pager. You get a commercial appraiser, it's 50 or 60 pages.
Well, I'm thinking a condo, they send 3 comps or whatever, right?
It's completely different. There's so many different methods they have to use, and they got to come up with a blended average on it, and it's much more in detail. And there's also so many different uses for the property. Is it going to be an owner-occupier? Is it an investment property? Is it a piece of development land? There's so many different uses that they have to consider when appraising the property. It makes it really, really interesting.
So how thorough are your CMAs?
Well, I call Thomas first, and then he sends me over the numbers, and I copy and paste those, and out we go. Here's the reality: is we subscribe to a lot of data subscription services for a lot of money,
right?
That the general public doesn't get access to. That gives us really, really good detail, and on top of that, we have an internal system at William Wright Commercial that tracks all of the company data, which arguably, and obviously this is a biased opinion, with having 7 offices now up and going through the province, we've probably got more data throughout the province than most people can get access to, because leases are not public information. There's no registry form. It's a private contract between buyers or between a landlord and a tenant. So when we're doing as many transactions as we are, both on the sale and the leasing side, we're building that data internally that our team gets access to this that a lot of other people wouldn't be able to track or find out.
So you get access. So you know what the true cap is then?
Yeah, you could say that. So we get access to a lot of stuff. So we know, in Kelowna, or Victoria or whatever, when we're doing all these lease transactions, and again, I should say that information doesn't become public. We're not taking clients' information and putting it out there. Internally, it gives us the ability as a brokerage to help clients make better decisions because we can follow trends. We can see where things are going. Thomas is on the same front, that they have access to information through their internal sources and brokers and all of that otherwise most people wouldn't get access to. So having him on today, we'll be able to get sort of a firsthand information of where things are trending and what's been happening as of late.
So how easy is it for you so you can literally just call Thomas up and be like, hey, what do you think about this?
I will always bounce ideas off him. Obviously, there's a lot of information he has that's confidential that he can't share with me, but I'll always be able to bounce ideas off of him. And they'll do the same too, right? They may be working on an appraisal and they'll say, hey, this is in your neck of the woods. What are your thoughts on this? And again, there's stuff he can't share with me when he's calling me, but he just wants, a general conversation around, hey, in New Westminster, on this block, what are you seeing happening? Again, and we can sort of go back and forth on that. And that's one thing within our industry, that having those commercial networks is so important because there's so much information out there that you just don't get without relationships.
I think this is one of the big, for people that buy residential real estate or invest in residential real estate and they transition over to commercial. I think one thing that they don't get is just how many deals are done off of the commercial MLS, right?
95% never probably hit the MLS.
And how many, but that must create insane challenges. So like, I think about like a centralized database, like Paragon MLS that we have in residential, where an appraiser goes and he looks and he can see the last 3 sales in the building. Yeah. He can see generally what things are rented for, or get a rent estimate or whatever it is he's looking for. It's pretty easy to find.
Totally.
Right? In many ways, your industry is so brokerage specific almost, right? Like it's almost like it's, how would you even describe it? It's sectioned off in a lot of ways, right?
So a lot of
like the knowledge.
Yeah. So the brokerage industry plays a huge factor in the commercial real estate business. You mean there's guys like Thomas play a big factor in that. But for example, let's say, for example, we go sell a development site to a client of ours and he holds that property. And then he says, hey, my thoughts have changed. I've got an opportunity to buy something else. I might want to sell this property. What do you think it's worth? And then our broker will sort of provide them with an internal, numbers of where we think it's worth that. And he goes, okay, well, if you can get me a number like that, I'll sell it. And then what our broker does, he says, great, no problem. And with the access that we have through the broker community, both in at William Wright, but also in other brokerages, because we all work together, is we might be able to take that client's information and say, hey, you know what? I know this guy over at CBRE that has a client looking for that. And they call the broker at CBRE and say, hey, my client might want to sell this. What are your thoughts? Their client likes it. The deal gets done. No one ever knows.
Right.
That's how most transactions take place in commercial, where people don't necessarily list it on the MLS, but it might be exclusively listed or it might be shopped off market. But that's how so many deals happen. And that's why in the brokerage community and the commercial real estate business is your network of individuals is so important, because these are how all these transactions happen. And it's not just commercial brokers, it's property managers. It's also lawyers and all this stuff that are all communicating with each other and their client base, that they might have a client. Maybe you work with a lawyer and that lawyer calls you and say, hey, my client owns this property. He wants me to potentially see what it's worth. Do you mind talking to the client for us, and maybe you can sell it for them? So all of that sort of how some of these transactions piece themselves together. Yeah,
and an obvious point, but the other big thing that is a huge difference from residential is that like no 2 properties are really the same in commercial.
No, we have so many different asset classes and so many different potential end uses of the purchase. They're always changing. And even if you take 2 retail spaces and you put in 2 restaurants, each restaurant's going to be posed with different challenges. Everything from electrical to HVAC and mechanical issues to, who knows what it could be. That the knowledge that a commercial broker can bring to the table when helping that, goes so far. And we see it, unfortunately, a lot of times where people come in and they don't want to have a broker involved, and we're acting on behalf of one or the other side. And our interest is to work on behalf of our client, and the deal gets done. And then after the fact, the other party finds out maybe they left money on the table when we're representing a purchaser, or vice versa. And having a commercial broker involved in your transaction is sometimes the best money you can spend, whether you're going in to purchase or you're looking to sell, just because of the data and the access to numbers that the public doesn't get.
Well, maybe without further ado, let's jump into this with Thomas from Campbell and Pound Appraisers.
Enjoy, you guys. This week's episode is brought to you by our great friends at Impact Commercial Group.
Really enjoy working with Impact Commercial. And we should say Al and his team can basically do anything when it comes to lending.
Anything when it comes to under the commercial umbrella. You're building a building and development, we got you covered. You're buying land, we'll make that happen for you. You're investing in a property or multifamily building, check. Owner-occupiers looking to acquire their own space, double check. Anything commercial financing you need, Impact Commercial is your go-to.
ImpactCommercial.ca. And we should say, over 50 years of combined experience. So trust these guys. They're the right fit.
Best in the business, in my opinion.
Okay, so we're here with Thomas Wieckowski. He is a staff appraiser at Campbell and Pound. How you doing, Thomas?
Doing great. How are you guys doing?
Really, really well. Yeah, thanks a lot for taking the time today. I know.
In Matt's words, back again.
Oh yeah, back again. Yeah,
fan favorite.
Fan favorite.
Yeah, fan favorite. Past gas fan favorite.
Yeah, really appreciate you taking the time.
No problem at all. My pleasure.
Can you start by maybe telling our listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I graduated from UBC and I studied economics, and shortly thereafter I entered the appraisal business at Campbell and Pound. And I started on the residential side, but like many people do, I quickly transitioned to the ICI or commercial end of the business around 2007. And I've been doing that ever since. And my firm essentially works exclusively in the Lower Mainland, Greater Vancouver, Fraser Valley, kind of out towards Chilliwack and perhaps out to Squamish and everything in between.
So Cory knows a lot about what you do. I'm less familiar. Do you work by asset class, or do you cover all the asset classes? And geographically, do you limit yourself, or do you go all over the Lower Mainland?
I personally go all over the Lower Mainland. I mean, I don't consider myself a specialist in any asset class. It kind of adds a nice variety and keeps your interest level up if you have some variety on your plate, so to speak. So I've essentially got experience doing just about everything everywhere in the markets that I've described, excepting for hotels and gas stations, which I don't touch either of those with a 10-foot pole.
And just for people that don't know what an appraisal is, or what role an appraiser plays in the commercial real estate world, can you just talk a little bit about what your kind of day in, day out, and what role you play in a transaction?
Sure. I mean, you can think of the appraisal as part of a due diligence phase that occurs either in advance of a deal or as part of the financing condition, to act as a third party check for the financial lender to essentially ensure that their financial exposure and their perceived level of collateral is exactly what they think it is. And so typically we are always going to be part of those transactions, but we also do work in the context of litigations or accounting exercises where other professionals need to have an expert opinion on the value of certain assets that they're discussing. So we essentially write due diligence reports that are used by all of those different users.
So Thomas, this is one reason why we wanted to have you on today. So we had Ryan Wong last week of Ryan, who's also a commercial appraiser. We have you on this week. You guys are on the front lines of sort of appraising the properties and sort of seeing property values go up, property values go down, maybe where people are buying, maybe where people are selling. Can you, if we take a step back here and go back 12 months or even longer than that, can you sort of just walk us through, as inflation is rising, as interest rates are rising, what have you guys seen generally there in maybe the various asset classes that you guys do in the Lower Mainland here with pricing and maybe the slide or lack thereof?
Sure. I mean, it's tough. It's tough to describe in logical terms the type of appreciation that happened coming out of COVID and into 2021. It was literally just going straight up, right? So the onset of the lockdowns in 2020, it was like nothing that I've ever seen before. I mean, the phone just stopped ringing. Emails just completely stopped. And for the first month, it's kind of nice. You're like, oh, I'm relaxed with vacation. Second month comes, you're like, oh, this is kind of strange. Third month comes, you're like, oh, this is concerning. And thankfully, it started picking up in the summer of 2020, right? And all through 2021, values were just ripping higher. And so, of course, the moves in the property market, as they gather attention, you gather more interest, more participation, and it kind of starts fueling a bit of a feedback loop, so to speak. And the gains are, I mean, they're almost indescribable. I can give you one example from my work on a property in earlier 2022. So this property, large bay industrial space in Surrey, placed under contract in January 2021 for $4.9 million as a new construction, going to be delivered in 2022. That contract was assigned in February 2022 for just under $9 million. So
Wow.
if you can imagine, as an appraiser, you're trying to wrap your head around that type of gain in the market, and it becomes very difficult because information is so quickly outdated, right? Like you're looking at a transaction 3 or 4 months ago, and in a normal market, that is a pretty good indication of value. And in the 2021, early 2022 market, it's like ancient history. It's like looking at something from another universe, right? So it did definitely, added some aggravation to the appraisal process. Things became a little bit trickier. You have to make a lot more phone calls to people to see the deals that are actually pending, because looking at stuff that closed 3-4 months ago, I mean, it looks like it's, from a completely different asset class in a different year, right? And moving into 2022, that changed significantly with the onset of these supersized rate hikes, right?
Right.
So the volume started falling off. The type of participation, the type of client that we had coming across the desks in my office, that changed. The speculators are gone, right? The people going in for the expectation of a capital appreciation and a kind of a shorter term time horizon, those guys have disappeared either because the argument isn't there for that strategy or they can't get the financing or both. So definitely slowed down in the second half of 2022. And what I would characterize now is that the people still doing deals are slightly more conservative and have a longer track record in the market. So they have weathered storms before, and they're usually at a lower level of leverage. That seems to be the theme that I would describe as prevalent right now.
Thomas, I want to go back and double click on when you kind of hit a roadblock with the comps, or when the comps don't make sense from 4 months ago or a few months ago. Your industry, like the commercial real estate industry, we talked a little bit about it in the introduction, but in many ways it seems kind of more opaque than, say, residential real estate, where there's a centralized database that appraisers can just look at past sales or similar sales or a condo or something to that effect. What happened? Like what approach do you take when you hit a roadblock, when you're trying to comp something out or trying to understand the value of something? And yesterday the market was way hotter, and you just don't have comps to work from.
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge of our business, right? We are essentially a business of information and interpretation of that information. So if you're unable to kind of fulfill one of those ends, you have nothing, right? There are some standard databases that we subscribe to. They're not publicly available, but they do provide a pretty reasonable indication of transactions that close, because they're in most cases linked to the land title office. So to the extent that things are trading in a traditional capacity, and I mean outside of possibly like a share sale, which is a little bit different, those transactions do eventually get recorded. What is harder to track are lease transactions, because of course it's private financial information. And especially over the last couple of years, I've noticed that brokers become more hesitant to release those details. I mean, strictly speaking, you're not supposed to release those details, right? Like somebody calls you on the phone and asks you about a lease deal, you're not supposed to actually disclose the key terms of that lease deal, right? So it becomes harder to get that information, but we do have a pretty good network of people with whom we have relationships, people we've worked with before. Obviously, the more work you do on a certain asset class in an area, the more you build up your internal files. So it's a mix. It's a mix of primary research, making phone calls, looking at traditional databases, and looking at your own internal files.
So, Thomas, I'm thinking about this slowdown in the market and the steep interest rate increases, and I'm wondering if you recognize an asset class, maybe from your experience or from your office's experience, that seems to be really outperforming right now.
You know, it's tough to say what is outperforming right now. I mean, the theme over the last couple of years, in my mind, has absolutely been industrial. And if you look at some graphs of the average level of rent for all industrial products in our market, it's unbelievable. Like, you can't even wrap your head around the fact that the rents have essentially doubled over the course of 5 years, from kind of 2017 to 2022, right? And it really does result in a lot of changing metrics. So suddenly, like properties, you can pay way more for a property knowing that the rents are so much higher than they were even a short time before. In terms of what's outperforming now, I can't really put a finger. I don't think anything is outperforming right now. I think it's probably a more defensive market currently. Certainly, if you're chasing higher yield, you're going to be taking higher risk. So anything with higher vacancy rates, as an example, office space, et cetera, in certain markets, you're going to get better yield, but you're taking more risk.
That makes a lot of sense. And if you're thinking geographically, is there a region that seems to be maybe performing really well, or the alternative getting beat up?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the markets that moved very, very quickly in a short amount of time, suburban markets, those now are looking like they were a little bit overextended, possibly, Fraser Valley, multifamily development sites in some of these areas, because the reality is that some of those types of projects they're commercial projects, but their end market is essentially individuals, right? Residential owner occupiers or, mom and pop investors. And they're not holding for income and cash flow. They're simply selling product to the market. So to the extent that demand has fallen materially, the metrics for a lot of these projects no longer make sense because the land costs have not really come off. Construction costs are as high as they've ever been, but the absorption is not there, right? So suddenly a bunch of these projects are looking like they're not that compelling anymore. And so people who are halfway through a construction, obviously they keep going, but I would expect to see some of these projects kind of get put on the shelf as people wait for a better time to kind of get the ball rolling on this.
So Thomas, you talked about, industrial was maybe like an outperforming asset class. You just touched base there on the residential development side or the multifamily development side. Some of these numbers aren't really making as much sense. Are you seeing where are opportunities right now in your opinion? Like obviously I think during the COVID days, retailers were probably hit pretty hard. A lot of people thought the office market would never come back. What asset classes and maybe regions do you think there's opportunities right now or have come back?
I think that's a difficult question to answer because opportunity is very specific, right? Like you can find opportunity anywhere as long as the numbers make sense. You can look at an asset class that is super popular, but if you have the right opportunity, it can still make sense. Conversely, you can look at something that is maybe beaten up or not that popular, but if the numbers make sense, maybe that's the compelling opportunity. For me, one of the interesting aspects of thinking about where we're going in 2023 is to look at something like purpose-built rental. The challenge with purpose-built rental that has already been tenanted and with older tenancies on the rent roll is that it's almost impossible to raise the rents in any meaningful way. And so it's excellent in terms of its defensive qualities, like you have very stable, very predictable income, but the extent to which you can offset your rising operating costs is very limited because of the political climate, right? One of the asset classes that maybe would be more interesting is some retail in markets that have reasonable proximity to rapid transit. Some of these tenancies are still experiencing a business slowdown. Like, so when I'm talking to some of my personal friends who have businesses and are talking about business conditions now versus pre-COVID, not everybody has fully recovered, right? And with the expiry of all of the COVID support programs, some of these tenancies are going to turn over. And that might create opportunity in some of these smaller retail type of properties where you can step in, replace the tenancy, turn over some older tenancies, increase the rents, and hold for that income while you wait for, the magical upside of rapid transit either continues to fuel further development or, like in the case of Langley City, bringing rapid transit out there. I would be looking at something like that myself.
So just to be sure I understood. So retail at transit-oriented development sites. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, when I say retail, I mean a retail property that is in the future going to be something more than what it is. But in the short term, you can potentially turn over some of those tenancies that are a little weaker, increase the cash flow to where you're comfortable holding. When you're stable in terms of your investment position, you can wait for appreciation and the development or the redevelopment case to be more compelling and exit at a future date, right? That's the dream.
So Thomas,
it's everybody's dream, right?
In saying that, we're looking at one thing we've talked about on the podcast before is just about markets where you see much lower lease rates. The markets have dramatically changed. And you mentioned there, you buy it in anticipation of raising those rates. Have you seen an uptick in buyers and buyers' interest that you're being commissioned for, maybe on markets outside of the Lower Mainland over the past couple of years? And if so, what markets are those?
I think over the course of 2021 and early 2022, I feel like a disproportionate amount of the stuff that I was working on was in the Fraser Valley. And so as properties become more expensive in the epicenter, the wave just ripples out, right? And people keep going to the next most affordable place. And, you look at the appreciation in industrial land as an example, it's literally like a wave that starts, in Vancouver and Burnaby and Surrey, and then it kind of floats out to Langley, and then it floats out to Abbotsford, and like it actually hits Chilliwack, where you're looking at some of the land values in Chilliwack and you're like, what? This was $500,000 an acre for 10 years, and now it's millions of dollars an acre.
Thomas, would you say you're on the front line of recognizing market trends?
I think market trends are established by institutional investors and developers, right? So to the extent that I'm observing what they are doing, I would say that I'm probably second, right? They see the deals first. They are the ones who are examining, passing, saying yes. They communicate with each other. It's like that world is always going to be first, but I'm probably one of the first observers of what that outcome winds up being or what the trend looks like it's going to become. And similar to, a commercial broker like Cory, who's facilitating a bunch of these deals, like they are often going to be very early as well.
Has this year felt different than Q4 of last year?
I think I don't know that I would say it's much different than Q4. Anecdotally, I feel as though there's some more positivity in the outlook, but I think it's still early days. To me, the positivity is largely driven by an expectation of the next move lower in interest rates. I don't know whether that initial positivity that started in early January kind of has a follow through in the next couple of months. But so far, maybe a little bit more positive in early 2023 than in late 2022, when it was very difficult to predict just how many more hikes were coming and how bad inflation was going to be and for how long.
So as one of the first people in the chain that can see the trends, where's Thomas investing in what asset class?
I think I know that answer, but
yeah, we're just going to get our pens out here, Thomas. So we'll give you some runway here. So where's Thomas's money going and why?
I think it's difficult to describe a hypothetical single asset that you're looking at. I would more so be inclined to describe a theme, and the theme would be to look for a property that allows you to be a little bit more defensive than you might have been in 2021. And more specifically, I would be looking for a property where I could add some value or differentiate myself from everybody else. Like if you just buy a property and, set it and forget it and go long, you're going to be essentially at the mercy of the market, right? Whatever the market does, that property is essentially going to do as well. In order to hedge yourself against that aspect, if you can do something to change the property, improve the property, either in terms of investment into the improvements on the property, turning over the rents, you are going to both outperform on the upside, but you're also going to provide a hedge against a market that might be weaker than you expected. So I would be looking for a property that would say needs a little work and has a rent roll that is under market. That would be my inclination.
Okay,
that could be in a bunch of different asset classes.
Just making my notes here. So if I heard you clearly, that's Kelowna Industrial and Nanaimo Industrial Class B. Okay, all right, go ahead. Just want to make sure I'm clear on what you're describing.
And I know, and so I'm actually interested though. It sounds like you're open to a variety of different asset classes, but do you have a geographical region that you monitor that you're excited about?
I think the entire Greater Vancouver area is very strong, right? Like I don't know that there's any market here that you're looking at now that nobody has noticed, right? there was a time when nobody understood that Maple Ridge industrial property was half of what adjacent municipalities were getting on a per square foot basis. And that changed very quickly, right? Like when you have such incredible appreciation in the market and it's just front and center inflation, real estate gains, like what winds up happening is all the stones get turned over, right? As people are looking for opportunities and deals and the relative bargains get found very quickly. And so I don't know that there's one particular market. I think one of the important aspects is to be open-minded if you can be. Some people are operating a certain asset class already. They have a portfolio of whatever it is, apartment buildings in Vancouver. That's their wheelhouse. That's what they want to stick to. And that's a valid strategy for sure. I personally would be open-minded because the numbers are the numbers, right? So you establish what your risk tolerance is, what your time horizon is to realize whatever outcome you're trying to realize on the investment, and look at a variety of opportunities. And the more deals you look at, the more likely it is that you're going to find one that is compelling or the right fit for you.
So just so if I interpret that comment again there, that's again, Kelowna industrial, the Nanaimo industrial class B.
Whatever Cory is involved in is usually a pretty good bet. And on a serious note, I mean, your strategy, Cory, with some of the stuff that you've done, that's a very good strategy and probably similar to what I'm talking about as well. You're always trying to add value to what you're doing, right? I mean, that's how you differentiate yourself from your peers. That's how you differentiate your performance from the market performance. It's being something more than the average, right? That's really what I would.
And just so the listeners know, like that was my original idea. Like no one else had done that before us. That was purely my own research and due diligence. I came up with that strategy. So I wasn't definitely the first one. Now there's many copycats.
Well, to be honest, over the last 10 years, right, anybody who went wrong has just had wild gains.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of people who have done absolutely nothing are sitting on these tremendous returns. And I don't know that that's the likely scenario going forward. I think we're going to revert to a more traditional environment where smart deal makers, people who are a little bit more disciplined, they are the people who are going to be doing well. And the blindfold dartboard crowd is going to be, I think, a little bit more variable in their outcomes.
Well, I think people here in Vancouver over the past decade, especially, are so jaded where traditional real estate investing has always been, I'm going to put the down payment down. I'm going to have a tenant. That tenant will pay my mortgage off over the next 10, 15, 20 years. I'll sell the house. And if I sell it for more than what I bought it for, I win because I put down 20. I sold it for 200. My tenant paid 180 for my mortgage off. I win. And so many people now, like if it doesn't double, it's broken. Like why won't anyone else buy it? And I think your comment in commercial there is buying things with a long-term outcome, but where you can add value by raising rents or the area is going to better around you, which will drive your rents up. I mean, you're making money, not only your tenants paying off, which is the traditional model, but now your rents are going up. So your income's going up on the rents. So now your income's coming in is going up very much more, which then adds greater value to the property. But then on top of that, as areas gentrify, you might get cap compression in there where the cap rate goes from a 5 to a 4. So now you're making money because your rents are higher, your cap rates are down, which makes prices higher, and the tenant's still paying off your mortgage for you, which is the whole purpose of investing in real estate in the start. So I think, with that strategy, and again, in a business like commercial real estate, and we joke how that was my strategy, I'm probably the 10 millionth person in line to have that same strategy, because if it's not broke, why fix it? Everyone has the same strategy that it does well. That if you just kind of follow that metrics and be on the front lines and have good people working with you to help identify those opportunities. I mean, it's a copy and paste repeat thing over and over and over again. No need to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always been a strategy, but I'm still surprised at how often it has not been implemented. But I think you're absolutely right.
Maybe now moving, Thomas, because we heard that your crystal ball's a little murky at the beginning of the show, but we're still going to ask you to look into it and give us your sights on the balance of the year, and then maybe kind of the next call it 1 to 3 years out.
Yeah, well, for 3 years out, I mean, I don't know that anyone can predict 3 years out. The central banks seem to have trouble predicting inflation 1 quarter in advance, so I don't know that I'm going to do a good job 3 years out. It's interesting to see what is going to happen with inflation, right? My personal feel on it is that it's going to be stickier than people might expect. The most recent numbers coming out of the U.S. with the supplier price, I mean, hotter than expected. Jobs number in Canada, hotter than expected yesterday. I think the Fed is not done raising rates. I think they haven't even talked about being done raising rates. It makes me wonder if Tiff Macklem is regretting his very clear comments that the rate increase cycle is on pause. I don't know that it's 100% done. I think that I would not be expecting any kind of cuts to the interest rate in 2023. So to that extent, I think this is going to be a pretty balanced market. And once you see that established trend that rates are coming off, not only in Canada, but I think in the US, it's difficult to imagine a scenario where rates are coming down meaningfully in Canada, but not in the US. So until that happens, I don't think it's saddle up cowboy. Let's go long on everything and anything. I think it's a more disciplined market, at least through the end of this year, and we'll see what happens in 2024.
I just, Cory and I were talking about a tweet I read this morning by Ron Butler, who's a mortgage guy. His concept, well, basically what he said, the concept of the big real estate turnaround just went back on life support. And I think his take is that it's probably going to be Q1, Q2 of next year if we see any rate cuts, which sounds kind of similar. So, but it sounds like a time for the deal makers then.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it's a very complicated subject, right? It's trying to control inflation through monetary policy, and especially when the central banks get behind the curve, they're essentially trying to push on a string, right? It's a lot easier to pull on a string to be ahead of the curve than it is to, wait till inflation is out of control and then you're jacking rates up and it's not entirely clear how effective they are. And it's not easy to figure out exactly where we are, because to a certain extent, we're kind of in uncharted waters. I've never seen anything like COVID. I've never seen anything like the kind of financial stimulus that came into the market as a result of COVID. And to try to just come out with a logical framework now of everything is going to go back to normal. I mean, what is normal? It's kind of lost its meaning in a way. It's hard to know with any kind of certainty exactly what's going to happen. And that's why being conservative and disciplined in your strategy is more important, I think, than ever.
Well, sound advice. We do have this segment called the Six Pack. Can you stick around for that? 6 lighthearted questions to end the show?
The Six Pack, I thought you meant like, let's start drinking.
It is Friday.
I can do the questions too. Exactly. Sure, go ahead.
The Six Pack is powered by our great friends over at Red Point Law.
Oh, the guys at Red Point Law are fantastic, Cory.
For all your legal needs when it comes to commercial real estate, visit them at redpointlaw.ca. First question up. So, Thomas, you've done some bad stuff. Unfortunately, you find yourself on death row and you're given one final meal. What meal is it?
I think there's no question that it's a giant bone-in ribeye with some kind of butter poached lobster and a magnum bottle of wine of some kind. I'd like to go out in style in a food coma.
I hope you don't die, but if you do, I want to join you for dinner.
Also, you're gonna have a jammer before they take care of you.
Well, all bets are off, right? I mean, you probably have a jammer, diabetes, gout.
Any specific restaurant you're getting that meal at? Because it sounds delicious.
You know what? Like I love to cook, so if you put me in a sunny backyard with like some hardwood lump charcoal and a cold drink in my hand and a cooler with all the food, I would be super, super happy right there.
Can you text us your address?
I know, right?
Favorite vacation spot? Question number 2.
I always like to be in a vacation spot where other people aren't. So I'm not a super touristy type of person. I love to be outdoors, either fishing or kind of in the bush where there's not a lot of cell phone coverage and not a lot of people. And usually in my happy place, and it's a nice change of pace from sitting in at a desk looking at a screen all day. So I probably need to balance myself by being the exact opposite of that when I'm on vacation.
So you're not joining Cory on his third trip to Disneyland this year?
That's a whole other podcast. I walked home yesterday into an intervention with my 2 kids and my wife because I went and booked a trip to Phoenix, thinking like, I'm a redhead, my kid's redhead, my wife's pale, this was my other kid, like this will be no problem. And I walk home and she's like, do you know how hot it is in Phoenix in June? It's 42 degrees. So I cancel the flight only to get I get the credit back from Air Canada because I have to sweet talk them to give me the credit. And then all of a sudden I walk home to an intervention like, we want to go to Disneyland for the 3rd time in 11 months.
I can't believe how hot it gets in some of those places. I went to Palm Desert, I think in early October. I remember opening the door of the rental car, like it felt like I got hit in the face with a hairdryer. I'm like, what am I supposed to do exactly here? I mean, there's people golfing at like 4 a.m. and you got to be done by 9. I don't know. I sat by the pool. I was listening to music. My phone just shuts down because it overheated. I'm like, I don't know. This maybe isn't for me in Northern Europe. But mine telling you to get out of here.
So Thomas, we're in your backyard. You're barbecuing. You're going to turn some tunes on for us here so we can enjoy our beer with you. What's your favorite band, musician? What music you turning on?
I don't like new age modern music. Probably a sign that I'm getting way too old and my hair is way too gray. But if you turned on like a radio station now that is contemporary, kind of pop music, I don't like it. I put on a playlist on Spotify called Dad Rock.
Dad Rock.
Just to see what it was. And I swear to God, every song was like a banger for me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know what this means, but like, I love this music. So I'm pretty open-minded with music. I like a lot of different genres. I mean, like I could listen to James Brown, or I could listen to Creedence Clearwater Revival, or, anything in between. Like sometimes when I'm trying to relax, I'll put on some classical music. I don't really have a strong preference for one type of music, just anything but the new age synthesizer, people twerking on the stage. That's where you're going to lose my attention fast.
I was driving home not too long ago, and I was like, pushing the radio buttons, and I came across like a great rock song. I was like, oh, this is awesome. And I'm listening to it. And at the end, when they're like, oh, hey, it's, thanks for joining us here at 101 Classic Rock. And I'm like, oh my God, my high school music is now classic rock now.
the golden oldies, right? Seems to be your favorite playlist.
Yeah. Question numbers. Are we already towards the end here?
We're at 4.
We're at 4. Okay. Karaoke song.
So you're drunk and someone throws
Cory,
a mic.
give the context.
Yeah, sorry, Matt.
There's 3 drinking questions
Adam
here.
can't read my gibberish here. So we're in your backyard now. We're listening to the Dad Rock thing. We're all having a few beers. We're feeling good about ourselves. Adam shoves a microphone in front of you. What karaoke song are you singing us?
I've never been to a karaoke bar in my life, and if you've ever drank with me, you would know that asking me to sing on a mic is probably a huge mistake. I'm such a dad singer. People have trouble hearing what they sound like as they're speaking, but when I sing, I can still hear how bad it is. Like there's still that voice in my head that says, not something you should be doing, be quiet, even though you're just in the shower by yourself, right?
Right.
If I was, I don't know, I want to pick a song maybe that everybody else knows. So my only hope would be that everybody else starts singing along with me, and then I could take the mic away from my mouth and hold it up to the air. Like
Sweet Caroline it is.
Sweet Caroline, or how about Lean on Me?
Right.
Lean on Me by Bill Withers or something like that.
And second last question, favorite bar or restaurant in Vancouver?
Well, that's a tough one. There's so many good places, but I found myself thinking about some really nice dinners that I had and that I haven't been there in a while. I'd like to go back. Is Miku down by the water in Vancouver.
Oh, that's a great one.
Amazing sushi there. Amazing food.
Yeah. Had some great dinners there.
Thomas, last question up here. What's a piece of advice you'd give our listeners who are looking to maybe make it a commercial investment in 2023, knowing the current economic conditions?
I would say be confident in your own strategy and don't chase. I think that in 2023, you're going to have more time to find the right deal, and that deal might come to you a little bit more than in years past. stick to your strategy and don't be afraid to pass up on stuff that doesn't.
So to summarize the podcast, it's Nanaimo and Kelowna, Class B Industrial.
Class B Industrial.
There's your strategy.
Well, thanks for taking the time today, Thomas. If people want to learn more about what you're up to or Campbell and Pound, how can they find out more?
They can shoot me an email. It's probably the best way. And I'm, hooked to my phone like everybody else in the modern world. So it's thomas@campbell-pound.com. We can shoot the breeze on any manner of real estate related topics. Always happy to talk to new people.
Amazing. Well, Thomas, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate all the insight as always, and have a good day.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Thomas. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
There you have it, folks. Our interview with Thomas Wieckowski, Campbell and Pound commercial appraisers.
Really enjoyed that conversation, Cory. Man, I got to say, as much as I respect what those guys are doing, I don't know that I'd necessarily want to be doing it myself.
A lot goes into it. A lot more goes into it than what people think. And Thomas kind of, sort of alluded to that on the interview there. But even when we're dealing with them, there's tons and hours spent on the appraisal side. Then they got to go to the property and get photos, and they got to analyze the photos and analyze the data. And that's where your 60-page report shows up.
Often in a time constraints, right?
100%.
I mean, that's the challenge too.
100%.
It's stressful work.
It is. But Thomas is great at it. We do a lot of business with him and various appraisers throughout the industry. So kudos to them.
I started this show with a full cup of Nespresso.
Yeah.
I'm ending this show with an empty cup. I feel almost nauseous. That coffee was so strong. I'm shutting down.
Well, I'm going to tell you a story. So I come in today and you're all excited to tell me about this new espresso machine, and I see it and I'm like, let me tell you.
That's a big purchase at our office, $150.
It's a big purchase anywhere.
A ribbon cutting event.
So all of our offices enjoyed the Tim Hortons knockoff Timothy coffee that we would get from Amazon because we just wouldn't spend money on coffee.
Sure.
And then we introduce Jeff Brown, who joins us, who runs our Kelowna and our Kamloops office.
He's a great broker. He's helped many of our clients.
He's great. And when he came over to join us, he was very adamant about this coffee maker that they needed. And I went along for the ride. I think I'm probably exaggerating. I think it was like a $1,200 machine, maybe $15,000, could have been $9,000 for all I know at this point.
Yeah.
But Jeff goes and gets a commercial Nespresso. And I get the bill and I'm like, what is this? I'm thinking I'm expecting when I go up there, we have a full-blown Starbucks built in our kitchen. This thing was so expensive.
Right.
So I'm out of despite, I won't try this coffee. And I told him, I'm like, hey, if any other broker from any office ever comes up here, that whole built-in wall unit you have there, that has to go because everyone else gets Timothy knockoff coffee.
Right.
Sure enough, one day I'm up there, I have the Nespresso. It was the best coffee I ever had in my life. So I will have to say at the end of the day, was the machine worth the $14,000? Probably not. But it was the best coffee I ever had that we went back and we bought the Best Buy versions on sale probably for $90.
Right.
Spread them throughout the company. Now everybody enjoys Nespresso and I got one at home. I love it.
And you got one at home.
I got one at home. The same one you got here. It's great.
Yeah. We should say the commercial real estate podcast is not sponsored by Nespresso, but man, I'm flying right now. It's
awesome. I have one before I Peloton, and every time I have one before I Peloton,
that's why you're falling off.
Oh, that's why I'm falling. That's why I'm breaking pedals. I'm going so fast. But every Christmas, like I told you, every Christmas they had this vanilla almond one.
Yeah.
That the first time I bought it, I thought it was all the time. The guy never told me it was limited. So I bought one or two of them and I'm like, this is the best thing I've ever had. I go back, the next girl tells me, oh, no, that's limited at Christmas. And I'm like, I would have bought more. Fast forward another Christmas, I go there and they have a very similar one. I'm like, do you guys sell that by the skid? I bought everything they had there and then I ran out. And then now all of a sudden I have no more left, but I'm waiting for Christmas again. Next Christmas, the vanilla almond gingerbread thing they come out with, it's a 10 out of 10.
I can't wait. I'm looking forward to that.
Your life has changed now.
Exactly. Well, Cory, how can people reach you if they want to learn more about commercial real estate or get in touch, of course, with Thomas or anyone in your network?
They can reach us anytime at our Vancouver office at 604-428-5255. They can send me an email, cory@williamwright.ca. Always love to hear good and bad stuff about the show. Or they can visit our website, williamwright.ca. Sign up for the latest and greatest news.
Well, have a great week, guys, and we'll be back with another great Vancouver commercial real estate podcast next week.
Thanks for listening, guys. Take care.
Subscribe today.